Okay. How's it going, gang? Welcome to the inaugural episode of Rock and Roll Shin-Soo Choo. So Shin, buddy, if you're listening, more power to you. Keep that on-base percentage up, all right? My name's Gabe Estel. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois on this lovely Sunday evening. I've got my good buddy Jonathan Getz from Kansas City. How's it going, man?
Good.
Good to see you. And I got my good buddy and my cousin as well, my own flesh and blood, Leach in Chatham, Illinois. How's it going, DL?
Doing good.
Good to see you, boys. Well, thanks for being a part of this journey with me, man. It's just kind of an experiment, you know. We're rolling with it. We love baseball. We love music, particularly rock and roll. So we thought, why not have a venue to talk about those things? So tonight, we're going to talk about our histories with our favorite teams, as well as kind of how we think those teams are gonna play this season, this really young season so far. And also we're going to talk about sort of on the theme of rebirth or the spring. We're going to talk about debut albums, so our favorite debut records. And one of the things that when we're going through the trial run of this thing, you know, we're going to try to avoid sort of the superlatives. You know, like we're the what is the best. I think all three of us agree that that type of journalism and that sort of list mentality that's permeated. But we're going to talk about our favorites, you know, rather than the best. So we're going to roll with that. I'll go ahead and start off. My name's Gabe. I'm a Chicago White Sox fan. And really growing up in a small town in central Illinois, my family was really the only family I knew of that liked the White Sox. Most people from my hometown were Cardinals fans, and there were quite a few Cubs fans as well. But even though the White Sox were in the same state, we've always been, at least in Illinois, kind of baseball outsiders. Not even that many fans necessarily in the city of Chicago, let alone the rest of the state. So I grew up as a little bit of a baseball outsider in my community. You know, I didn't really have a friend to talk about the White Sox. Other than, you know, my grandfather and some of my family members, my uncles, my dad somewhat. But, you know, that was kind of an interesting period because, you know, I was the only kid wearing White Sox stuff, really. And, you know, probably the culmination of all my years of patience paid off in 2005, like it did for a lot of people. Really glorious time. Sandwiched in between kind of some years of mediocrity. So, you know, I really look at this team in 2014, and I think that we're in a transition mode. We're really well equipped, I think, to be a competitor in 2015 rather than 2014. Talk about the arrival of some guys I'm really excited about with the White Sox. Adam Eaton is really this kind of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's really this kind of hard-nosed center fielder who we got from the Diamondback system, which seems to produce some good talent. So he is the person that, to me, represents kind of what can be sort of the complete baseball player that I like. You know, I like a leadoff guy. I've always liked a leadoff guy. I like kind of sort of the grinder mentality. He seems to embody that. And also, you know, plays a good center field. You know, he's an exciting defensive player as well. So he's one of these new pieces that I'm really excited about, as well as a guy by the name of Jose Abreu. This guy is a Cuban slugger. You know, he's been projected to hit quite a few homers this year, and I'm not sure if he's going to hit as many as people predict in his first season, but he's definitely going to have some power. And if you've seen him, he's ripped. He's a beast.
He's a big dude.
Yeah, really big dude over at first base. And when he was in Cuba, which I would have to think, I don't follow the Cuban league. I would have to think there's so much baseball talent in Cuba that it's got to be comparable to like AAA at least. I mean, that's what I'm guessing.
Yeah.
You know. So he put up like RBI video game baseball numbers in Cuba. The dude hit like 32 home runs, I think, in 66 games. And he was also sort of one of the heroes of the World Baseball Classic last spring. So there's no doubt the dude can hit. It's just a question of how well is he going to be able to hit big league pitching. So I'm excited about him. That's another piece. And then really the other guy I'm excited a lot about. He's not on the team right now. He actually didn't break with the team at the onset of the season. Is a guy by the name of Matt Davidson. He is another big guy, third baseman, kind of like a Matt Williams type, sort of that big lumbering third baseman. I don't know how strong his defense is going to be, but he's going to be a big power hitter. I like my corner guys to have a lot of pop. So I think that's the third piece I'm really excited about is this guy by the name of Matt Davidson. So those are to me like sort of the three guys going forward that I really think are going to be the core of this team. At least as far as position players goes. As far as pitching, I hate to rub it in, Jonathan, but today, as you may know, Chris Sale took care of the Royals.
Yep.
We had a battle of our aces today, and I got to watch the game, and I was excited because really two pitchers that I really love to see pitch in Shields and Sale.
Sure.
I mean, those are two of the. Shields has been around a little longer, but two guys that are really great for the American League Central. To have both of those guys going at it is a good thing. And we had kind of a late game surge today, but we still lost the series. Kansas City is certainly a team that's got a lot to look forward to. So Chris Sale, he's a guy that I look at his mechanics and it kind of frightens me because I don't know if you guys have seen his delivery. He really looks like he's going to throw out his arm with each pitch. He's just got like a really funky looking delivery, sort of unorthodox. And I kind of worry about that, especially because he's young. He's going to be, our ace. He already is our ace, but he has the potential to be, one of those sort of pitchers of the decade, really. He's a lefty. So he's one of those guys that he could throw out his arm or he could win the Cy Young this year. It's possible. So I'm excited about him, but it's a little bit of a tentative excitement just because that delivery is just weird. I don't know how else to describe it other than it's just I just sort of when I see him pitch. It excites me and frightens me at the same time. So that's a little bit of my Sox as well as how I think they're going to shake out this year. I think we're going to be better than a lot of people give us credit for. But when I say that, I think that means third or fourth place. I look at the Twins and I don't see much going on there. There's a couple. They got that kid's name Byron Buxton, I think.
Yeah,
something like that for the Twins. You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. He's like one of the best prospects in baseball, so they're kind of in a similar position. And sort of Joe Mauer is you're always on a little bit of thin ice with him, with his history of injuries and how he hasn't really had a lot of power in that ballpark. So I don't think the White Sox are going to finish last, but I don't think they're going to finish first either. So I would put them somewhere. I'd put them in third or fourth place. I think I'm going to pick KD to win that division, probably followed by I'm going to pick Detroit to win the division, followed by Kansas City very closely. So I think Detroit's only going to win the division by a game or two. And then Cleveland, I think, will be, they'll have a good squad as well. The White Sox probably fourth, and then followed by the Twins in fifth. So I think it's going to be sort of a season of growing and a season preparing for a competitive 2015. That's how I see the White Sox shaking out this year.
Right on.
But sort of a mediocre 2014.
Yeah. I guess you look for that individual growth, right?
Yeah.
During the year, and then the Royals, they've been looking for that individual growth for several years now. And
this it's going to happen though this year. If any, now's the time, if ever. for Kansas City.
Right. Yeah. And I guess we could use that as a segue.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I moved to Kansas City about 10 years ago, and went ahead and decided to kind of obviously inevitably follow the Royals, as I could go to as many games as I wanted here, and tickets are easy to come by. And so yeah, I've been watching and enjoying them like I do any good AAA team. And as they didn't seem like a threat to the Red Sox, who I followed since I was 10 years old. But it's always interesting, the build up to these high expectations, and where they're at now is that point of delivering at least a 90-win season and finally breaking this playoff drought. And if the start of the season is any indication, it's a bit of the same, in that they have no power, and have yet to hit a home run. I think it was really important in a way that their third game with Detroit was rained out, because if they came back from Detroit 0-3. That would have been, I think, kind of devastating for them.
Would have tainted the early part of the season.
Yeah, I think, even though it's a long season, starting off 0-3 is not good for the psyche of a young team. And but to come back and then get 2-3 from the White Sox is kind of important. That being said, I think a lot of people are still really skeptical, and not just the jaded skeptical, but the realistic skeptical. If a guy like Hosmer can hit at least 25 home runs, which they need him to, they need somebody to, or if anybody other than James Shields can win you 15 games, right. I think there's going to be a lot that is determined this year, and unfortunately beyond this year, I don't think it involves James Shields. I think personally that they're starting to regret the James Shields trade. I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think they weren't a team that should have made that trade. If they were in the hunt for a pennant at the trade deadline, they should have made that trade. But if you ask them right now if they could reverse that trade, I think they would. Because they're going to go up against Odorizzi this week, and
all right.
And Will Myers, last year was really pretty good, and so was Shields, but there's no reason to believe Shields is going to be with them beyond this year, and this isn't a team that's going to legitimately compete for a World Series this year. Now, I think that they can't compete for a wild card, but they're going to have to cobble together a lot of hits and a lot of stolen bases and a lot of infield hits and sacrifice flies, because they don't have that huge threat that can turn a game. Consistently turn a game into like a 6-2 or a 7-2 game. It's going to be a lot of 3-1, 4-1, 5-3 victories for the Royals. But that being said, they have a lot of the pieces. Billy Butler, I think it's implied that he's expendable, and he's going to hit you 40, 45 doubles. And there's a lot to be said for 45 doubles, especially in that ballpark. But you need a guy who's going to get you 110 RBI at the same time, and bring those guys home. So, but you never, if he hits 20, 25 home runs, yeah, great. He's worth, seriously, considering holding on to for the long term. But at some point I guess you have to let go and think about what you need, as opposed to, keeping him for just because, all the kids are wearing his t-shirt jersey, at the ballpark. So, But Gordon's a keeper. Perez is a keeper. Moustakis, I don't know. It's make or break year for Moustakis. I think they can't keep pinning their hopes on potential, especially when it comes to third base. You need to get at least 280, 20, and 90 out of your third base position. You have to compete. Especially to compete with Detroit and to be able to chip away at Verlander and Scherzer over the span of an entire season. So, that being said, I think they compete for the wild card. I don't think they have a serious competition for the World Series. I think second place is entirely plausible.
Yeah, I'd slate them in the second place slot as well with them. I'd actually pin them getting the wild card. I would.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have one of those wild card spots, so that'll be good for the fan base. One thing I want to say before we switch over to Levi, you talked about sort of if you could look back, you might redo the Shields trade, right? I think that trade was really to send a message to the fan base that we can't rely on prospects forever. We've got to go after a front line pitcher.
It was absolutely.
And
that's how I explained it when I tried to endorse it when it happened. And I think the lesson learned is that you shouldn't listen to fans. I don't. If your GM is just a consensus of a metro population of 2 million people, then you're going to get some really average decisions being made. And I think you need somebody who sticks to his guns. And they had a lot of. I'm sure that they've had a lot of offers to trade away young talent for veterans over the years, and they haven't done it. And they finally did it and brought in a guy like Shields. And there is immediate gratification from that. But long term, I think now the fans understand. Maybe that we weren't thinking long term. Even though they're just like, we want a winning season, and the GM's like, well, I want more than a winning season. I want to put ourselves in a position to go deep into the playoffs, and James Shields alone doesn't take you deep into the playoffs.
Right. Good points all around, man.
Yeah. Well,
yes, Levi, let's kick it over to you, my brother.
Yes, my name is Levi Leach, and I am a diehard Cubs fan. Some days, unfortunately, and born and raised in the Midwest, born and raised a Cubs fan always. All my family's a Cubs fan. This year, also kind of like Gabe mentioned, I think maybe the Cubs might be good in 2015 or 2016. Maybe not so much this year, though. They did get a win today, and our pickup from you, I think, Jonathan, Emilio Bonifacio.
Yeah, he's tearing it up.
He's a stud.
Tearing it up.
It's like MVP in the first week of the season.
Yeah, if he's on your fantasy team, you're rocking.
I know.
So, but other than that, it's a lot of young guys and a lot of untested guys. And you've got Rizzo and Castro, two guys who are definitely having a year where they need to prove something, and there's a lot of young infielders coming up. So I think it's definitely keys to the season for the Cubs are going to be how those two guys do, how the starting pitching holds out. I don't know if Zamarjo is even going to be there at the middle of the season or so after. Who knows? The nucleus of all the new coaches and the new players are going to have to get together and gel, and it's definitely one of those seasons where it's a rebuilding experience. And the new coach, Rick Renteria, is kind of a more soft-spoken guy and we'll see how that plays out in the clubhouse. And he is Spanish speaking. I know that was one of the big reasons they brought him in, was to be able to talk to a lot of the other players. And I mentioned before, I think Tom Ricketts and Theo Epstein are looking through their old Diamond Kings to get our managerial staff, because we now have Chris Baccio as our pitching coach and Bill Miller as our hitting coach. And a fun fact I didn't realize about Bill Mueller was, I guess, for 4 or 5 years, he was like Mr. Consistency. His average was like 290 to 295 for like 5 years, basically. And so that's what I think they're hoping
Yeah.
to bring in, is someone who can like somehow get some consistent hitting going for the Cubs. And we'll see how it works. Today they actually did get a few hits and even a couple with people on base. So it was, I think, just a showing of things to come. It's a young season, a young team. They got a lot to work through to get to any kind of, I don't want to say like a milestone, but they're going to have to put together a bunch of wins before I think they could feel better as a team. Um, Overall, in playoffs, obviously not. I would say the Cubs
No.
last in the division, second to last. And last year we had 66 wins. And so, I mean, on paper, I would say we're not as good as a team as we were last year, but I would like to, I guess, have more than 66 wins, but who's to say if that's going to happen? Yeah, that would be my experience with the Cubs this year.
I mean, both Chicago teams basically have to just hope for more wins this year. I mean, the playoffs are out of the
Absolutely.
question for either team. They both just have to play better than they did last year, and work with sort of these new pieces. One thing that Levi mentioned, a guy that Levi mentioned at the beginning of his monologue, was Starlin Castro, and I don't think our player has as much upside as Castro. Our Starlin Castro on the south side is Gordon Beckham. Gordon Beckham, despite having a beautiful mane of hair, is it's been a disappointment. I think a really big disappointment to a lot of White Sox fans. He was one of our highest draft picks in quite a while. He was picked, I think in 2008 at pick number 8. So he was a top 10 draft pick. Because the White Sox usually, we had a lot of third place years, so we were always picking sort of in the middle of the pack or something like that. So Gordon Beckham has been our Starlin Castro, and I say that because we've hung a lot of potential on him, and we brought him up early, but the thing is, he's regressed, and you've seen that with Castro as well.
Absolutely.
You saw this big splash right away, and the fan base rightfully got excited. But last year, just major back for Castro. I mean, he looked a little lost out there at times. And we've experienced the same thing with Beckham. I think he's more injury prone than Castro, and that's played a role certainly. But both of those guys, both of those guys, middle infielders, both of those guys really have make or break years this year. And Beckham's already hurt. He hasn't he hasn't even suited up yet, so he's already hurt. So for me in Chicago, the spotlight's going to be on those two guys this year, on the south side and then on the north side, because I think if it doesn't pan out after this year, I certainly think the White Sox are going to move on. The Cubs probably have a little bit more time with Castro, just because he is a little bit younger. I don't know if Castro doesn't pan out this year. I don't know if they get rid of him. I don't see that happening. But he's got a 2-year window to prove himself. I think Castro does.
Yeah,
and I think Beckham's got a 1-year window.
You hate to see players fall by the wayside because they were brought up too early and they don't have enough experience. And like you said, a lot of times, I mean, they will, as soon as they get up, make a big splash. Like Anthony Rizzo, or last year, Junior Lake, the Cubs called up, and he was a monster for a week, But they, You know, it can only do so much to put a short spark into the team, or to put a few people into the seats for a short amount of time. The development of these players is what needs to be brought to the forefront, and needs to be the the main goal here. And a lot of times at Wrigley Field, it's get the kids out on the field as soon as they can.
Yeah, a lot of fan bases don't have patience. You know, fan bases are fickle. They want to see it happen right away, and especially if your teams have struggled, as all three of the teams we're going to discuss today kind of have, you know, in recent years. You know, the fan bases are going to get restless, and that time for people to develop, they're not going to be as patient. So you've seen that manifest in Kansas City, Chicago, and Chicago. So groovy. Well, one of the things that we've wanted to do with this show, to make it more than just a baseball show, we're all music lovers. You can see Levi's extensive collection of vinyl right behind him. If I'm not mistaken, that looks like a Kentucky Headhunters LP. Right
I got a couple debut records behind me. We got the first Kentucky Headhunters and the first Government Mule record over here. So,
oh, nice. So we're going to talk about rock and roll quite a bit. I mean, all three of us are avid concert goers. You know, we grew up together, so we grew up, I think, with a lot of the same musical experiences. You know, all of us got into a lot of the same bands at the same time. You know, we have our favorites, certainly, and probably as the podcast goes on, people are going to learn what bands all three of us like. But I hope to reveal a little bit more than that. You know, I hope to throw some wild cards in there, you know, so I can learn something that I didn't know about Jonathan, maybe that he likes, or something that Levi digs that I wasn't really aware of. So, to put it bluntly, we're not going to talk about Pearl Jam the whole time, right? So
though we could, if we wanted to, we could.
We very much could. But we're not going to do that.
That's another podcast.
What we want to do during this first episode is really, in conjunction with the start of the baseball season kicking off just a week ago. We want to talk about our favorite debut records. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not saying these are the best debut records of all time, but we're each going to share three of our favorites. Talk a little bit about what makes them unique, why we dig them. And these might not even be like three of our favorite artists. You know, I mean, some of these albums that we share, these are just really great debut records, and I want to talk about that. So we're each going to share three of them, and you know, we might do a little bit of back and forth as well. You know, I know these are I think we're all going to share records that all of us have heard probably. You know, we might not be as familiar with them as those who list them and share them. But I'll go ahead and start, and I'll let you guys sort of riff on that as well. I'm going to go with my three first, and my first, and I'm going to say this because there was some news earlier this week that the original bass player from this band is filling in some shows in South America for the current bass player. The current bass player of this band actually happens to be the bass player for one of my other favorite bands. I'm talking about Guns N' Roses. And Guns N' Roses has been, as you guys know, for the last really, ever since the mid-'90s, has basically sort of been Axl Rose's sort of project. That's this thing that's sort of shape-shifted a bit. A lot of people going in and out of the band. But I want to talk about their debut record. You know, really, it's their defining moment. Then it happened almost 25 years ago now, or it happened over 25 years ago. Appetite for Destruction. You know, this album to me is just a collection of kick-ass songs, start to finish. The songs are amazing. I remember when I was young, I saw the Welcome to the Jungle video right when it emerged, and I could tell that these guys were different. You know what I mean? Like, I was being fed at that time a lot of Poison, a lot of Dokken, a lot of the Bullet Boys. These really, you know, that we all know sort of the Aquanet type bands. which I think produced a lot of fun music. It wasn't music that had a lot to say. But then Guns N' Roses came along, and they had musical chops. They certainly got lumped in with that crowd, but they were also sort of giving the finger to that crowd at the same time.
Sure.
And they put out a very sort of, I hear a lot of Rolling Stones influence on Appetite for Destruction. The riffs are great, and I think the unsung hero of the album is a guy by the name of Izzy Stradlin, who is really, I'd go as far as to put him as one of my favorite rhythm guitarists of all time. To me, he's one of the closest things, and he certainly didn't have the longevity, and that's all due respect to Izzy. The guy still makes music. Go buy his albums. He's support him. I think it was the closest thing we've had in rock and roll to really like Keith Richards type riffs. I mean, Izzy could write just an amazing riff. So to me, he makes that album. Without Izzy Stradlin, Appetite for Destruction would be sort of a mediocre album. But you put Izzy in there, and he puts it over the top. And it's just such a great collection of songs. Rocket Queen is probably my favorite on the record. Probably my favorite GNR tune as well.
Great song.
Mr. Brownstone is great as well. It talks about the slummy brownstone apartments in West Lafayette, Indiana, is what that song's about. And I love, Welcome to the Jungle. Obviously, I know it's a song that's been overplayed, and it's played when sports teams come out and things like that. But I'm sorry, I don't turn it off when it comes on the radio still. It's one of those songs.
Okay.
Just the opening number, just the da-da-da-da-da, it's just, it's good. It gets me excited. So Appetite for Destruction is one of my favorite debut records, and really one of my favorite records of the 1980s. It was kind of like, it was a Stones record, but for the Sunset Strip. That's kind of what it was for. So Appetite for Destruction, and then one of my second favorites, I don't know, you guys might not know this about me, but Nevermind the Bullocks by the Sex Pistols. Also one of my favorite debut records. It is also a record that is, like Appetite, sort of bluesier than a lot of people, I think, give it credit for. I look at songs like Submission, just a killer tune. And also, I think, as well, Paul Cook could write some amazing riffs. Like Paul Cook's an underrated guitarist. He's that album is much bluesier than people give it credit for, and I think one of the best opening tracks ever in Holidays in the Sun. I just love the sort of the foot stomping and the hand clapping, and just Paul just really just sliding down the neck there. He's just the guy's so good. Just Paul Cook is their Izzy Stradlin, and also another band that you only really think of one record. I think when most people think of Guns N' Roses, they think of Appetite for Destruction. Don't get me wrong, Use Your Illusion was big, but it was bloated. So Nevermind the Bullocks, though, is really the Sex Pistols' only record. I mean, they put out there's sort of rarities and B-sides that came out and live recordings, but it's their only record. And it's a damn good one, and it deserves to be mentioned, I think, in some of the best debut records of all time. My last one is certainly, it's a sentimental choice, but it's also, I think the music holds up, and I don't necessarily know if the latter part of their career holds up, and they've certainly been in the news lately more for fighting with each other over the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame than they have any music that they've written. But yeah, one of my other favorite debut records is the first Kiss record. To me, and I can tell why, I know why people hate Kiss. I know that Kiss isn't everyone's cup of tea, so to speak. But to me, that first Kiss record is much like a New York Dolls record, more than it is a later Kiss record. It's those early Kiss shows with their energy. They were sort of like the New York Dolls in kabuki style makeup. That's kind of what they were. If you guys
hard glam.
Go on YouTube. What's that?
They
What's
were
that?
like a hard glam band.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were like a harder glam band. Really, is what they were. Absolutely. And the first record in particular, the debut record, such great songs on there. Deuce, Cold Gin. They also do this love theme from Kiss, which is this, of sort of weird thing that they do with they've got sort of some Zeppelin like flourishes on it even at times. So they were trying to find their identity, but I think in sort of trying to find their identity, they might have put out their best record. They still play a lot of those songs live. And really they were really four kids from New York who were hungry, and they weren't really they didn't become art house favorites. They wanted to take over the world. That's what they wanted to do. And for a brief period in time, they really did. So I think the first Kiss record is one of the best debut records, and I think it shows a time when Kiss really had the substance down rather than just the style. And I think as the 70s moved on, Kiss's music, I think, became overproduced, too bombastic. Obviously, Gene Simmons' just stadium-size ego came into play. Peter and Ace certainly had their problems. But this was a moment in time where you had really four guys who were broke. They loved the New York Dolls. They loved Sweet. They loved Slade. And they took those influences, put on some makeup, and just made a really kick-ass rock and roll record. So I'm going to go with Kiss as my final selection. Jonathan, I'm going to think that Kiss might not make yours, but I want to hear yours anyway.
No, I can. Well, I can respect the Kiss. I will go in a different direction. And to start, when you were talking about debut records, it got me thinking about albums that I reach for just as consistently as any other album in that band's catalog, and that is it's not as common as I thought it was. With a lot of my favorite bands, I don't reach for the first Neil Young record that often, even though he's my favorite songwriter. I don't reach for the first Wilco record because it's just it's a different band almost. And so as a result, I was really trying to think about that in a different way. And so, a guy like J.J. Cale was somebody who was really consistent from his first record to his last record. He did have some flourishes in between. But his first record naturally is right up there with some of his best stuff, and has some of his most memorable songs on there, and as a he's a songwriter who doesn't get recognized for the songs that people know, like Call Me the Breeze, and but his tone on there was just, it was dead on, and there was no like figuring out, because a lot of bands, they're kind of these, they're figuring out their production style more than even just as much as their songwriting when they're releasing that first album, and some of the band's production style doesn't really match, or doesn't quite get to how good it's going to get in hindsight. But J.J. Cale's production style has always been lo-fi, so it was easy to reach that right away. And just the groups of musicians that are on that album kind of speak to his approach to music throughout the years. J.J. Cale is just somebody I've always really respected, and through his whole career. So. But in addition to that, was kind of another album from the 70s. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' first record. And again, they were, talk about production. They were setting new production styles with the recording of the kick and the snare, and establishing styles of recording that would be used and abused for the next 10 or 15 years at least, definitely throughout some of the '80s, and but nobody could quite capture those sounds like they did. And and yeah, I mean that album's creepy too. Really, really dark in some areas.
For sure.
But you know, you talk about Welcome to the Jungle. You know, if Breakdown's playing on the radio, you know, I won't turn that off because it's just got this vibe to it that doesn't wear out. And even now, you know, when he's performing it over the last 10 years, it's he's expanded it a bit, and it still has that creepy vibe, but it's evolved at the same time.
Very moody song.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just that Mike Campbell guitar riff throughout it, just like kind of high on the fret there. That those hammer-ons, never get tired of those. And then my third one's a bit more obscure, and I have a picture. I brought it so that I could plug it, but it's Jim Sullivan, and it's called UFO. And Jim Sullivan was a songwriter in L.A. Who had no acclaim at all. He was just trying to make ends meet, and he recorded this record. It didn't go anywhere, and he ventured out to. He decided he would try to go to Nashville to be a country songwriter and make his living that way, like a lot of people do. And but on his way out, he essentially went missing, and he was never found. He went missing in the desert. Was the last place that I think it was recorded. He was seen, and so it kind of adds to this to the songs on here, because they are about you know, it's called UFO. There's a song in here called UFO, and it's about UFOs. I'm not saying he was abducted, but I'm saying it's just this idea of like mysterious circumstances. You know, there's another song called Highways. It's creepy in hindsight, and that can kind of cheapen it a bit, because obviously this guy didn't know he was going to go missing in the desert. And this was only recently discovered, rediscovered, I should say, a few years ago, and re-released, or given the first proper release that it's
What's
ever
the label?
It is Light in the Attic. I believe is Light in the Attic Records.
I'll have to check it out. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm definitely into stuff like that. I mean, another guy who kind of has a weird story back mystique is Nick Drake.
Oh yeah,
and you know, it's very cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. Thanks for putting me onto that.
And as far as I know, it's his only recording.
Cool.
So kind of a different angle on that thought as far as debut records go. But yeah, definitely check it out. I guess it was originally, he recorded it in '69, and then they re-released it in 2010. So there's a pretty good NPR story on it as well, about the guy who dug it up and pushed to get it re-released. So yeah, those are my three.
Nice. The very good three, Jonathan. I definitely like the Tom Petty for sure, as you mentioned. That album basically created the Sound City sound that later made that studio famous. They owed a lot to Tom Petty for sure on that.
Definitely.
And well, my three favorite debut records are a whole hodgepodge mix. And the first one, I wish I had it on vinyl to show you, but I don't. It's Blind Melon, the first Blind Melon record. And I bet I still listen to this album once or twice a month.
Really?
And
wow.
For some reason, hearing these songs take me to like certain places in my mind, and I don't know why, but certain things that you hear can take you to, when you were a teenager, or, that summer moment you remember or something. And I definitely get that from that record. And, I've always thought they were kind of underrated as musicians, especially because Chris Thorne was a multi-instrumentalist, and Brad Smith had killer harmony backup vocals, and the drummer's always in the pocket, and they had the prerequisite 1990s like crazy lead guitar player, and that record means a lot to me, and I think a lot of people just kind of know them as almost like a Spin Doctors type of act.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they hear No Rain, and that's No Rain's on their '90s compilation CD after Little Miss Can't Be Wrong, and so. I feel that that's kind of cheapened their legacy, but I just saw them with their new lead singer last summer, and I have to say, man, it was, if you close your eyes, it sounded a lot like the original Blind Melon. And it was just so neat to be able to go to a concert and feel the connection with those songs, because they basically played the whole record, because, as you know, their catalog is not very deep. And so it was a neat bonding experience with a band that I cherish, and I cherish that first record of theirs. And the second favorite debut record I have is by a band out of Canada called the Sam Roberts Band. It's called We Were Born in a Flame. And how I actually first heard about this record was a random night. I was home. I had gotten home probably from either playing or being at a bar, and it was like 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was back when MTV2 just played music. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but they had a video they made for a song off this record called Brother Down.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. You remember how we used to say, hey, you guys remember when MTV played videos? Now we say, hey, do you guys remember when MTV2 played videos?
Oh, yeah. Hey. Right?
Our expectations keep getting lowered.
Oh, yeah. MTV8, the Ocho. And so they had a video they made for this song on here called Brother Down, and it was my first introduction to them. And it's got like a sparse guitar riff, and the song kind of deals with the world and the environment, and just, people and relationships, and how, the world's maybe not as friendly a place as it once was. And for some reason, that video, and it was a video of just, I believe it's Sam Roberts and another guy on like a small canoe or a kayak in the middle of the ocean, is the video. And then finally at the end, like, they get into a fight, and like, they get pushed over the side of the ship. And it kind of, builds in climax with the song. And so I checked it out, and the record is great. It's one of the better, I would say, unheard of debut records of the 2000s. And just chock full of great guitar riffs, great songs. I know both of you guys would really enjoy it. He just seemed like a normal, cool Canadian kid from the 80s. There's like a song about riding his bike and going to the store to buy hockey cards. And just really neat songs about life.
If he's got any songs about Rush, I'm in. All right.
Right? Well, he's definitely got some like harder rock tendencies. And he's made a few records since then, this first debut, and I would say maybe they're not as maybe Americana sounding, or I don't know, singer-songwritery as this first record is. But it's definitely a really, really good debut record. I recommend it to everybody. And then my last debut record is from a band that, as Gabe mentioned, one of his favorite bands was tearing up the Sunset Strip. And this band, The Doors, they were one time the darlings of the Sunset Strip as well. A different time and a different place for sure. And this record means a lot to me just because they were one of the first bands that were, I don't know, kind of like gave an FU to the recording industry, to the music industry. Jim Morrison was completely insane, but in a good way. And
yeah, they weren't Herman's Hermits by any
means. I'm going to go through these track listing, and all these are almost all classic Doors songs, Oh, yeah. Break On Through, Soul Kitchen, Crystal Ship, 20th Century Fox, which is probably one of my favorite Doors songs, Alabama Song, Light My Fire, Backdoor Man, I Looked at You, Into the Night, Take It As It Comes, and then the magnum opus, The End, which is one of the most insane ways to end a debut record. If you go back and still you listen to that song, it still sounds as crazy as the first time you heard it. You know what I mean? It takes you to a dark place, and that's hard for a lot of bands to do on their debut record. They're obviously not an underrated band, and I'm sure that record has been on a lot of debut album favorites, but I definitely like it as an introduction into that band for sure. I think it's a very well done album.
No, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. All great selections, guys. Man, so much fun to hear all those. And I look forward to hearing more about the Sam Roberts Band. I've heard of them, but I haven't really listened to them yet, so I'm going to put those
definitely check out that first record, man. It's a very good introduction
later this week. Cool. I think among all the groups and musics that we mentioned, we mentioned a lot of. Obviously the Doors were a big band. Appetite for Destruction was a huge record. But we mentioned a lot of underrated players in there. Jonathan mentioned Mike Campbell. To me, he's one of my favorite guitarists.
He's been one of the most important songwriters of the last 30 years.
Yeah. Mike Campbell is one of those guys that even though he's in a huge band, he should be a household name. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like Mike Campbell Mike Campbell's the shit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to put it.
Yep.
And I mentioned Paul Cook from the Sex Pistols, a guy who certainly hasn't really, he didn't maybe have the most prolific career, but a guy I think's really underrated as a guitarist as well. Like 1 foot in blues, 1 foot in punk. And then and also I mentioned Izzy Stradlin as well. And then Levi mentioned all the guys in Blind Melon that I think in my opinion, one of the best guitar combos of the 90s in Roger Stevens and Chris Thorne. Yeah. Those guys, is a great interplay between those two, and Chris Thorne was one of those guys. Like he plays the mandolin and stuff, right, as well. I think.
Oh
yeah. Yeah. So he's a multi-instrumentalist, really talented cats there, and I certainly cringe as well when I mentioned that I like Blind Melon, and some people just dismiss them as this one-hit wonder band. It's unfair to them. And it also shows you sort of unfortunately, how fickle, tastes can be, and how sort of sometimes, our moment in the spotlight isn't as long as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually had the chance to meet those two guys. Small side story. It was at Bonnaroo, and it was the smallest stage at Bonnaroo, and this van pulls up, and these kids come out, and they basically look kind of like Kings of Leon, long hair, straight off like the Lynyrd Skynyrd tour bus, bell bottoms, boots, the whole works. And I'm like, man, those guys look like they could potentially be good. And out right behind them walked Brad Smith and Chris Thorne, and lo and behold, it was the band American Miner, which they had just produced their record, and it had just come out, and they were like, I was awestruck, and I talking to them and was saying, I'm a huge fan.
1 second, guys, I gotta keep going.
They basically were very kind and answered some of my questions about gear, about Blind Melon, and they told me to stick around and that I would enjoy American Miner, which I did, and I would say they were probably. It was tough not to pick them as one of my favorite debut records.
Sure.
If you haven't, Gabe, you've heard American Miner, correct?
Oh yeah, really great.
I was telling Getz, it was hard not to pick that as one of my favorite debut records, and just because I'm really, really partial to it, they had such a great sound that they didn't even get a chance to be a one-hit wonder, really. It was like they were such a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
And I always felt bad because it was almost like those guys in Blind Melon got screwed twice, is how I felt about it.
Yeah.
I was like, damn, man, they had a shot to take this band to the top, and Instead, Kings of Leon or Mumford and Sons or somebody else, got popular, not them.
Yeah. That's funny you mentioned that because the closest I came to meeting a member of Blind Melon was I actually went to Shanahoon's grave, which is located where? In West Lafayette, Indiana.
Yeah.
There you go. Full circle.
Second West Lafayette reference of the
There
day.
you go. Yep, I did that for you.
Nice.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, boys, excellent work.
Good
I had fun. Yeah, definitely
absolutely.
Good times, man. Absolutely. We will do this again next week. We'll talk later in the week about kind of our homework assignments and what's going to be the focus of next week's show. So, first episode of Rock and Roll Shin-Soo Choo is so rock and roll and enjoy yourself, guys. Have a great week, okay?
Right on.
Yep.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Later.